Is an 850-carat diamond brooch the ultimate royal privilege, or simply an architectural disaster waiting to happen? We know Queen Elizabeth II adored her brooches, wearing them almost every single day of her life. Yet, if you look closely at her 70-year reign, a curious pattern emerges. Several of the most spectacular historic masterpieces in her vault remained entirely untouched. Why would the ultimate jewelry collector leave such incredible treasures in the dark? Today, we will try to solve this puzzle. We are going to track down a colossal diamond giant that mysteriously retreated from everyday wear, examine a legendary gemstone that suddenly turned into an unspoken taboo, and reveal the forgotten, century-old heirlooms that Queen Camilla is only now bringing back into the light. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. We have recently looked at how royal necklaces and rings can sometimes create practical challenges, requiring a careful balancing act just to get through an official engagement. With royal brooches, at first glance, the situation seems a bit different. After all, a brooch is supposed to be easy. You simply pin it to your coat or dress and go about your day without suffering from sheer impracticality. Queen Elizabeth II was arguably the ultimate fan of brooches. Jewelry lovers around the world absolutely adored examining her daily choices, trying to decode the quiet messages she masterfully encrypted in them. Yet, even for such a devoted admirer of brooches, some of the most spectacular masterpieces in the collection remained completely untouched for decades. The best place to begin is with the most famous diamonds in the world. When we think of the Cullinan I and the Cullinan II, we immediately picture the ultimate symbols of the British monarchy. The pear-shaped Cullinan I, weighing an astounding 530.2 carats, is famously set in the head of the sovereign's scepter, and the 317.4-carat cushion-shaped Cullinan II sits right at the front of the imperial state crown. But did you know that these colossal stones were originally worn by a royal woman as a personal brooch? When the stones were first cut, their very first setting was actually a temporary one. They were mounted together as a massive brooch, specifically for Queen Alexandra. It was only after King Edward VII passed away in 1910 that the new king, George V, followed through with his father's original intention. He commissioned Garrett to officially incorporate the diamonds into the crown regalia. But crucially, the jewelers designed them to be removable. Queen Mary occasionally took advantage of this feature. She would have these two giant stones unfastened from the state settings, clipped together, and she wore them suspended on her chest as an absolutely monumental brooch. Interestingly, there was a time when I used to confuse these enormous stones with the famous brooch affectionately known as Granny's chips. In reality, of course, Granny's chips consist of the Cullinan III and IV diamonds. Looking back now, I can't help but smile at my own eye for scale. Once you see the numbers, the difference is almost unbelievable. And the scale here is almost unimaginable. Together, Cullinan I and II weigh nearly 850 carats. In the early 20th century, Queen Mary's gowns were built with heavily structured, stiff bodices that could easily support that phenomenal physical weight. But for Queen Elizabeth II, royal dressing had fundamentally changed. While it remained technically possible to wear the Cullinan I and II together, they no longer fit comfortably within the visual language of modern royal dress. Let me ask you, if you saw Queen Elizabeth II entering a modern state banquet wearing a colossal 850-carat brooch, wouldn't you faint? I generally tend to believe that there is no such thing as too much for a queen, but the Cullinan I and II together as a single brooch looks like a bit too much even to me. There is another fascinating jewel that ended up resting in the dark for decades simply because of its sheer, uncompromising size. In 1900, the prominent society hostess Margaret Greville took an old diamond tiara to Boucheron in Paris and had it dismantled to create a rather striking diamond bow. The royal jewelry expert Hugh Roberts perfectly described the result as large and lively, despite being of exceptional size. When Mrs. Greville passed away in 1942, she left her magnificent jewelry collection to Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. In a charming letter to Queen Mary, Elizabeth admitted she loved beautiful stones with all her heart, though she joked she probably wouldn't see the actual jewels for quite some time, owing to the usual slowness of lawyers and death duties. When that initialed black trunk finally did arrive, this massive diamond bow was among the treasures. The Queen Mother wore it a couple of times, notably for the state opening of Parliament in 1948, and later at a royal film performance in 1961. But when Queen Elizabeth II inherited the brooch in 2002, she never wore it in public. Royal women today generally avoid such bulky, oversized ornaments, and even for Elizabeth II, this particular piece was likely just too large and cumbersome to easily incorporate into her wardrobe. I personally would love to see this exquisite diamond bow catch the light again. And honestly, it might just happen. Queen Camilla certainly isn't afraid of massive jewelry, and she has a clear inclination for reviving long-forgotten pieces from the vault. Knowing her bold approach to historical gems, do you think she might eventually give this oversized diamond bow a second chance? While most of us are familiar with the controversial history of the Koh-i-Noor, we rarely talk about its life as a brooch. Today, we know this 105.6-carat diamond as a highly sensitive state treasure, kept safely behind glass. But for decades, British queens wore it as a personal ornament. After the stone was presented to Queen Victoria in 1850, she had it set into a diamond brooch, and you can see it resting prominently on her bodice in several official portraits. Queen Alexandra followed the same tradition, wearing this massive stone on her chest for grand occasions. Queen Mary wore it too, but she liked to change things up. She wore the Koh-i-Noor in its traditional, elaborate brooch frame, just like Victoria and Alexandra did. But she also occasionally wore the diamond in its simplest, minimalist mount, without the large decorative frame, simply pinning it directly to her dress or sash. Aside from being worn as a brooch, the Koh-i-Noor eventually began its journey through the crowns of the queen consorts. First, it was set into Queen Mary's coronation crown, and later, it was transferred to the crown made for the Queen Mother in 1937, where it remains to this day. This crown was present at Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953, yet the Queen herself never once wore the Koh-i-Noor. In the modern world, wearing this diamond anywhere would be completely unthinkable. It had ceased to be a sparkling accessory and had become a diplomatic minefield with a deeply contested past. We saw a very careful resolution to this issue just recently. When planning the 2023 coronation, Buckingham Palace made a deliberate decision. Instead of using the Queen Mother's crown with the controversial diamond, Queen Camilla chose to wear Queen Mary's crown, modified with the Cullinan diamonds instead. It was a pragmatic way to honor royal tradition while avoiding a massive diplomatic headache. While it is easy to understand why a politically sensitive diamond like the Koh-i-Noor was kept in the dark, there are other pieces in the royal collection that remained unworn for reasons that had nothing to do with global diplomacy. Instead, they belong to a far more intimate, emotional kind of quiet. I am talking about two of the Queen Mother's favorite brooches, her sapphire corsage brooch and her silver anniversary emerald flower brooch. If you look back at historical photographs, you will see she wore them frequently throughout her long life, reserving them for many of her most precious family milestones. The sapphire brooch was part of a grand sapphire and diamond suite given to her by Queen Mary as a wedding present in April 1923. Interestingly, while the Queen Mother apparently never wore the matching necklace publicly, and it is believed she actually had it remodeled into fringe earrings, the corsage brooch was an instant hit. It quickly became one of her absolute favorites. It has an incredibly elegant look, featuring delicate scroll and floral motifs. It was designed in what jewelers call a negligee style, which was highly popular in the early 20th century. This simply means the two diamond and sapphire pendants hang asynchronously. One is suspended slightly lower than the other. The Queen Mother wore it for decades, from theater performances in the 1930s to the christening of Prince William in the music room at Buckingham Palace in 1982. On that day, She even chose a bright blue dress and hat specifically to echo the deep, rich sapphires in the brooch. She wore it again for Trooping the Color in 1991, riding in a carriage next to a young Prince Harry. The emerald brooch tells an equally beautiful personal story. It was a gift from her husband, King George VI, in the spring of 1948 to mark their 25th wedding anniversary. Crafted in the shape of a tropical flower with a gold stem, it is set with brilliant diamonds and rich green emeralds. For the Queen Mother, this flower was a deeply sentimental token of a marriage that had weathered the abdication crisis and the dark days of the Second World War. She wore it for her official silver anniversary portraits, and then, later that same year, she chose it for the christening of her very first grandchild, Prince Charles. She wore it again in 1950 for Princess Anne's christening, and continued to bring it out for her favorite events like Royal Ascot and her own birthday celebrations well into her late 90s. In fact, one of her very last public appearances in the emerald brooch was at the Epsom Derby in June 2000, when she was 99 years old. When the Queen Mother passed away in 2002, both of these sentimental brooches were inherited by her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II. Yet, over the next 20 years, the Queen never wore either of them in public. Now, we know that Elizabeth II was never shy about wearing her mother's jewelry. She frequently wore pieces like the Courtauld Thompson scallop shell brooch or Cartier ruby floral clip brooches, which had also belonged to the Queen Mother. So, why did she leave these two specific pieces untouched in the vault? Perhaps, for a daughter, wearing these specific pieces felt a bit too personal. The emerald was a direct token of her parents' long marriage, and the sapphire had been present at almost every major family celebration. Leaving them untouched might have simply been her way of keeping those warm memories exactly as they were, associated only with her mother. I have to admit, I would absolutely love to see that stunning sapphire brooch make a comeback. But on the other hand, the modern monarchy seems to favor much simpler, more understated jewelry these days. So I do worry we might not see this grand, ornate piece out of the vault anytime soon. Do you agree with that choice? Or do you think these beautiful pieces deserve to be seen and enjoyed by a new generation? It is a delicate balance, isn't it? But not every long-hidden brooch was destined to stay in the vault forever. Some pieces were kept strictly out of sight for decades, only to be brought out at the very sunset of Elizabeth II's reign for a few deeply symbolic moments. This is Queen Mary's turquoise brooch, a classic cluster of diamonds surrounding a vibrant, smooth turquoise center. Its history takes us back to July 1893, when it was presented to Princess May of Teck, the future Queen Mary, as a wedding gift from her parents-in-law, the future King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. Queen Mary wore it occasionally, most notably in 1948 for a gala performance in London, when she chose to suspend the Marquise-cut Cullinan 6 diamond from it as a pendant drop. After Queen Mary passed away in 1953, the brooch was inherited by the young Queen Elizabeth II. Yet it remained untouched and completely unworn for an extraordinary 61 years. It wasn't until 2014, when the Queen was in her late 80s, that she finally decided to bring it out of its long retirement. It quickly entered her late reign rotation, appearing at her 90th birthday celebrations in 2016 and at the Royal Windsor Horse Show in 2021. But it was on April 5, 2020, that this turquoise brooch gained its most profound significance. During the height of the global pandemic, the Queen delivered a rare, historic address to the nation, ending her speech with the reassuring words that, "We will meet again." Pinning this specific brooch to her green dress was a very quiet, thoughtful choice. Turquoise has long been associated with healing, protection, and hope. By wearing her grandmother's gem, she seemed to be invoking the steady, quiet resilience of Queen Mary, who had helped guide the nation through the dark days of a world war and the Spanish flu. Since then, the brooch has entered a new era. Queen Camilla recently debuted it for Royal Ascot and wore it again for her first garden party in 2025. It is one thing to leave a mother's personal heirloom in the vault, but what about the jewels Queen Elizabeth II owned before she even came to the throne? It turns out that some of her most deeply personal early treasures were also kept strictly out of the public eye. On March 28, 1942, a quiet, wartime confirmation ceremony was held in the private chapel at Windsor Castle for the young Princess Elizabeth. Because of the war, it was a very small family gathering, attended by her parents, her sister Princess Margaret, her aunt, and her grandmother, Queen Mary. On that day, Queen Mary presented her granddaughter with a lovely diamond and turquoise brooch set in an asymmetrical floral motif. The 6 turquoise stones are framed by sizable diamonds, and some believe the design actually depicts a pansy flower, whose French name, pensée, translates to think of the giver. Gifting turquoises at confirmations was actually a deeply rooted tradition in Queen Mary's family. When her own mother, Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, was confirmed in 1850, she had received a trio of diamond and turquoise bow brooches. This small, sentimental flower was one of Elizabeth II's longest-owned pieces of jewelry, given to her a full decade before she ascended the throne. Yet, throughout her entire 70-year reign, she was never once photographed wearing it in public. Did she wear it privately, away from the cameras? Or did she simply keep it safe as a quiet keepsake from her grandmother? We only learned of its existence recently when Queen Camilla debuted it during a state visit to Germany, serving as a beautiful, silent tribute to Elizabeth II's legacy. Another piece Elizabeth II quietly preserved in her vaults without ever wearing was a stunning diamond bow that hides a very clever secret. This is the Rothschild diamond watch brooch, and its history takes us all the way back to July 1893. It was a wedding present to the future Queen Mary from Alice de Rothschild, known to her friends as Miss Alice. She was a member of the famous banking family and shared a deep passion with Queen Mary for curating lavish art collections. The brooch eventually made its way to the Queen Mother, who famously wore it in July 1936, just months before her husband's accession to the throne. At the time, the court was in mourning for King George V, and she wore the bright diamonds pinned to her black jacket during a visit to the British Industries House. After that single appearance, the piece vanished into the royal vaults, remaining completely unworn for nearly 90 years. If we look closely at its design, it is easy to see why Elizabeth II might have left it aside. It is a highly specific, late Victorian piece. It consists of a diamond bow suspending a round diamond floral pendant in the shape of the Rose of York, with a small diamond chain. But the real surprise lies in its construction. The diamond rose actually conceals a fully functioning watch face. While Elizabeth II apparently felt this charming, hidden timepiece didn't quite fit her modern style, we finally saw it again when Queen Camilla wore it for a grand, unexpected return at Royal Ascot, proving once again how many silent masterpieces still wait in the depths of the royal archives. This quiet pattern of preserving, rather than displaying, didn't only apply to antique heirlooms. Even in our modern era, Queen Elizabeth II continued to receive spectacular, highly personal tributes that she chose to keep strictly out of the public eye. A beautiful example is a brooch presented to her in 2012 to celebrate her Diamond Jubilee. To mark her 60 years on the throne, the King of Bahrain commissioned the prestigious court jewelers Cleave & Company to create a highly symbolic piece. They designed a brooch modeled precisely after the historic coronation bouquet she had held on her coronation day on June 2, 1953. The original bouquet was a beautiful, patriotic mix, representing every corner of her realm. It featured orchids and lily of the valley from England, stephanotis from Scotland, carnations from Northern Ireland and the Isle of Man, and lilies from Wales. The jewelers painstakingly recreated these delicate, cascading blossoms in white gold, setting them with exactly 60 brilliant-cut yellow and white diamonds, one for each year of her long reign. Even the presentation box was an absolute work of art, custom-made from solid rock crystal, set with diamonds and mounted in white gold. Yet, despite the deep sentimental value of a piece that captured the very start of her journey, the Queen never once wore it publicly. Perhaps because it was such a literal, detailed sculpture of her coronation day, She viewed it more as a private, commemorative monument of her milestone rather than an accessory to be worn. Another piece that lay untouched in the vaults for decades is Queen Victoria's diamond sunburst brooch. It is a jewel with an interesting history that connects the British court to the imperial court of Russia. Also described as a diamond fringe brooch with a detachable pendant, it features rays of diamonds radiating from a central cluster. Its story takes us back to 1896, when Tsar Nicholas II was crowned in St. Petersburg. Queen Victoria sent the Duke and Duchess of Connaught as her representatives, but she worried her daughter-in-law might be outshone by the incredibly wealthy Russian Grand Duchesses. To prevent this, Victoria lent her this spectacular sunburst brooch from her personal collection. Historical photographs show the Duchess of Connaught wearing it pinned to her bodice, just below her sash. After Queen Victoria's death, the brooch was eventually inherited by her granddaughter, Princess Marie-Louise. Marie-Louise lived a turbulent life. After a dramatic divorce from a German prince, she technically became a princess of nowhere when German titles were abolished, but she kept her grandmother's diamond sunburst for decades. She wore it to Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953 and also wore it for portraits taken by Cecil Beaton. When Marie-Louise passed away in 1956, she bequeathed the brooch to the Queen Mother, who wore it occasionally, including for a family portrait in 1972. After that, the piece was inherited by Queen Elizabeth II in 2002, but she never wore it in public. The public didn't see the sunburst brooch again for nearly 50 years. It finally reappeared in 2021 when Camilla wore it to the James Bond premiere of No Time to Die, choosing to wear it without the detachable pendant drop. She wore it once more in 2022 for a Vogue photoshoot, but since then, the sunburst brooch has returned to the silence of the vault. At the Commonwealth Day service in March 2024, Queen Camilla stepped out at Westminster Abbey wearing a spectacular, oversized aquamarine brooch that immediately caught the eyes of jewelry lovers. The design itself is a beautiful example of Edwardian elegance. A massive round aquamarine is nestled inside an ornate filigree diamond heart, and suspended from a delicate diamond chain below is a second heart-shaped aquamarine ringed with brilliant diamonds. Initially, the palace only shared that the piece had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, offering no further history. But the mystery was quickly solved. Norwegian historian Trond Noren Isaacson, who has had access to the photographic inventories of Queen Alexandra's jewels in the Royal Archives at Windsor, confirmed its true origin. This breathtaking piece had belonged to Queen Alexandra. She may have received or commissioned it around her 60th birthday in 1904, and there is a strong possibility it was crafted by Fabergé. Alexandra's sister was Empress Maria Fyodorovna of Russia, and the Romanovs were famous for gifting exquisite aquamarines. But here is the real puzzle. After Alexandra's passing in 1925, the brooch was inherited by Queen Mary, and later by Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. Yet neither of them was ever pictured wearing it. I honestly don't know what surprises me more, the fact that we never saw this unusual piece on Elizabeth II, or that Queen Mary completely ignored it instead of remodeling it to suit her own tastes. How does a masterpiece of this scale, with such a rich heritage, lie completely untouched in a vault for over a century? But there is an entirely different class of jewels in the royal vaults, the ones that leave even the most dedicated experts completely stumped. It is not that these pieces lack an official history, it's simply that the palace chooses to keep their lips tightly sealed. And when the royal archives stay firmly shut, we are left without the exact information to state anything with absolute certainty. One of the most fascinating examples appeared in North Wales, at St. Asaph Cathedral, during the Royal Maundy service in April 2026. Queen Camilla wore an unusual brooch made of yellow gold, featuring a cluster of diamonds surrounding a massive central sugarloaf sapphire. A sugarloaf sapphire is a beautifully rare, unfaceted stone with gently rounded, pyramid-like sides. It is substantial without being flashy, and at the very top of the brooch, 4 diamonds form the shape of a tiny cross. Because the brooch was worn to a cathedral service, Many royal watchers immediately noted that its shape resembles a bishop's mitre. Others, however, believe it looks like the cap of Monomakh, the historic Russian coronation crown. I have to admit, I personally lean toward the theory that this might be an antique Romanov piece. It has all the hallmarks of early 20th century Russian design, set in warm yellow gold rather than the cool platinum that was so popular in the West. Of course, there is also a very strong possibility that Queen Elizabeth II never actually owned this piece. King Charles has wonderfully refined taste, and many suspect he may have quietly acquired this antique gem from an auction as a personal gift for Camilla. It would certainly explain why it has never been seen on any other royal lady before. But what do you see when you look at this shape? Does it look like a bishop's hat to you? A traditional crown? Or perhaps something else entirely? There is another mysterious piece in the collection that presents an equally delightful puzzle. It is an antique gold bow brooch that Queen Camilla has actually been wearing for over 20 years, debuting it just weeks after her wedding in 2005. We have seen it many times over the decades, including during a royal visit to Jersey in 2024, and then again in the village of Dedham in early 2026. The piece is crafted in the shape of a stylized ribbon with a warm, burnished gold finish. Suspended from the bottom of the bow are two blue pendant drops topped with tiny gold crowns. These drops don't have the glassy clarity of polished sapphires. Instead, they have a slightly mottled, varied appearance, leading many to believe they are actually crafted from lapis lazuli. The drops are drilled beads, meaning they can actually swivel, which sometimes causes the little crowns and the gold initials on them to shift out of alignment. It is these initials that have sparked the most intense debates. One of the blue drops is decorated with a script letter E, while the other features a block capital E. One very popular theory is that this piece originally belonged to the Queen Mother, whose first name was Elizabeth, of course. Some suggest that the two different fonts might represent Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and a young Queen Elizabeth II, using an older, classic script for the mother on one side and a more modern block letter for the daughter on the other. But like the sapphire mitre, there are also whispers of a Russian origin, perhaps linking the piece to Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna. The two different fonts are such a fascinating, unresolved detail. Whose story was this originally? Perhaps in time, the palace will finally share the true story behind this mysterious gold ribbon. But until then, we are left to wonder, or perhaps you have your own theory about this double E mystery. If you do, please let me know, as I'd love to hear your thoughts. Exploring these exiled brooches shows us that royal jewelry is never just about decoration. Sometimes, the decision to leave a masterpiece in the dark, whether to respect a mother's private memory, avoid a diplomatic storm, or simply because it no longer fits the visual language of the era, is just as powerful as choosing to wear it. These silent treasures act as keepers of history, waiting patiently in the vaults for their moment to return. I would love to know, are there any specific royal brooches from the past that you remember, which have been hidden away for years, that you are secretly hoping to see again? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. I always look forward to reading them. If this journey through the royal vaults was as fascinating for you as it was for me, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Because in the end, jewels may be silent, but their stories are not. And they won't fade away as long as we keep telling them. I will see you next time.